It was quite by chance that my ancestors came to settle in Kenya. In the early 1900s, my great-uncle Will was living a relatively prosperous life in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His family, my great-grandmother was Will's sister, had left rural Scotland for Africa in the mid-1820s. A truly capable and resourceful man, Will had worked hard in difficult conditions, farming the land, raising a family, and helping others around him to survive the effects of the Boer Wars. He was garrulous and charismatic, a twinkle in his eye, passionate about big game hunting, and from time to time could afford a ticket to Kenya on one of the early steamships to satiate his lust for the land and the animals. The great profusion of wildlife, the rolling grass plains, the storehouse of life itself. Kenya was where his heart seemed to soar, where he was transformed from the inside out. It was during one of these hunting expeditions in the spring of 1907 that Will befriended Sir Charles Eliot, governor of the fledgling British colony of Kenya. The two men were drawn to each other. Will, a true pioneer, was the sort of man who made things happen, and Eliot, a true politician, was the sort of man who made other men offers to make things happen. Out in the bush, one morning, Eliot put an intriguing proposition to my great-uncle. If he could bring in 20 families to Kenya, then the government would allocate them free land on which to settle. Just that week, Eliot had received an order from the authorities back home to speed up the colony's development, to get on with expanding the single track beyond Nairobi, and to get white settlers in to increase trade and the resources for the railway. The British government had so far forked out around £5 million, and they wanted to see some return sooner rather than later. The reason for Britain's involvement in East Africa was not actually Kenya itself. It was Uganda and the source of the Nile. The government wanted to prevent the Germans or French jeopardizing access to the Suez Canal, as this was the British trade route to India, the jewel in the imperial crown. Building the railway was a massive undertaking, and thousands of Sikh labourers from British India were shipped in to undertake its construction. The railway snaked its way through the diverse habitats of Kenya, from the port town of Mombasa, through dense, inhospitable scrubland, leading on to open grassland plains, once the native Maasai's best grazing land. Once the dominant tribe, their numbers had been depleted by smallpox during the late 1900s. Great-uncle Will was so smitten with the Kenyan bush, so captivated by the idea of actually living in this astonishing country, that he cut short his trip to return home, determined to recruit the families that Eliot required. He didn't need to look too far, as this branch of my family was full of prolific breeders. He himself had spawned 17 children from his 3 wives, and they in turn had produced many others. Excited and alive to this opportunity, he did a good job persuading some of his immediate family to agree. Then he turned to his sister, my great-granny Agate. She and her husband, and their not inconsiderable brood of 8 children, were perfect targets. Things had not been going too well for great-grandpa Agate. Having acquired a taste for alcohol and gambling, in cahoots with none other than the local bank manager, who saw to it that his mounting overdraft was conveniently overlooked, he was up to his eyes in debt. The family's precious old homestead and once prosperous farm in the Eastern Cape had been sold off, and he was much chastened by the consequence of his addictions. Despite approaching 60, he was keen to be rid of his tarnished reputation, to begin a new life. Will was offering him that lifeline, and he rather gratefully signed up. The Agate's eldest daughter, Ellen Margaret, had been widowed early on in her marriage. Left with 2 young sons, Stanley and Brian, she had returned to live with my great-grandparents. Ellen was a feisty young woman, known for her fortitude and resourcefulness, and was more than willing to taste adventure.